Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in this beautiful morning for the premiere of CBC's brand new radio show, History Morning in Canada. I'm your host, Daniel Miller, and this is our first time in studio, and we are aiming to become Canada's most popular history radio show and to provide people in Canada knowledge about this amazing country's past. Every week, we will arrive on a new topic or continue on a previous one. There will also be guest speakers who are historian experts on Canadian history that will help spark things up here and share their knowledge. Before introducing today's topic, let's introduce today's guests, Kevin Liu and Kevin Wang.
Hi, Daniel. Hello, everyone listening. Pleasure to be here.
Same here, Mr. Miller.
For sure. This is great, Kevin, and oh, great. You're both named Kevin. Oh well, that's fine. 2 world wars, 2 Kevins, why not? Alright. Thank you two so much for being here today with us. It is such a big day for this show. As you know, it's the premiere. Would you gentlemen please care to give an introduction about yourselves?
No problem, Daniel. Well, I am a historian and part-time history professor at Queen's University over in Kingston. I graduated from there too. And I have to say, they have an amazing history program for all you keen historians out there. I come from Ottawa, Ontario, and I do not specialize in any form in the teachings of history, well, except for generally Canadian history. I'm currently working with Kevin Wang on a research project. We're looking into Canada's Depression years and trying to get into some specifics about the Dust Bowl and all that. Over to you then, Kev.
Okay, well then. I am a historian too and a part-time history professor at the University of McGill. Shout out to their fabulous history program there. Like Kevin, I also do not specialize in any specific fields in history. You mentioned our research project together, and is that not what we will talk about, host?
Thanks again. I'm just really happy that you two could be here today. And yes, we are going to talk about the Dust Bowl today on the show, focusing on its causes and outcomes, as well as other details.
Yep.
It was hard for our producers and thinking panel to decide what to put on the show today, but this past summer in Canada certainly was not the best for Canada's farmers, especially in central and eastern Canada.
For sure.
I agree. This year, they experienced very little rainfall and extremes in temperatures throughout both summer and winter. It's been a tough year, and local farmers need advice on how to cope with these conditions. However, experts have realized how similar this year's farming conditions were to those during the years in the Dust Bowl. So what we want to know is when the Dust Bowl started, and what were the causes that led up to the Dust Bowl.
That's a great question. Well then, the Dust Bowl officially began in the year 1931 and ended in 1939. Many people believe that, Daniel, there was only one real cause that started this disaster, but there were actually many factors. The Dust Bowl happened not because of one or two small reasons, but because of many ill-timed events.
Really?
Yeah, economic depression, extended droughts, abnormally high temperatures, poor agricultural practices, and even wind erosion all had a part in creating the Dust Bowl. But the three main major factors that influenced the Dust Bowl the most were economic depression, droughts, and poor agricultural practices. Dr. Liu knows more in depth about some of these causes.
Sure thing. Well, the economic depression had a major role in creating the Dust Bowl, eh? It was what many consider the only cause.
Definitely.
The stock market crashed in 1929. It was the beginning of the disasters that are still yet to happen. The crash of the stock market affected the price of wheat a whole lot. The price of wheat plummeted to below even the price of seeds.
Wow.
This affected the prairies greatly as they were left in poverty and unemployment. It wasn't pretty, folks. Drought was another key reason as to why the Dust Bowl happened. 1930s was the start to a gruesome 10-year-long drought. After many years of drought, the topsoil turned into dust. This ultimately drained any chances for the farmers to make any recovery, especially right after the economic depression. Simply put, without water, the crops won't grow. And if the crops don't grow, the farmers won't make any profits. Dr. Wang, can you tell about the last major factor that caused the Dust Bowl?
Sure thing. Well, The final major factor that influenced the Dust Bowl were poor agricultural practices. As expected, the farmers also had their share of mistakes that led up to the Dust Bowl. They had poor agricultural practices. Post-World War I, farmers tried out the new mechanized farming techniques as a way to increase their profits. Obviously, their tech was not as advanced as ours today, but between 1925 and 1930, the farmers, with the aid of new plows and other farming equipment, were able to extend their farming land dramatically, some even into the Badlands. In 1931, farmers produced record crops. However, because of this overproduction of crops and the crash of the stock market, the price of the crops plummeted dramatically.
Yep.
And because people were too afford to buy the wheat, farmers were unable to earn back their production costs, which worsened the situation.
Well, guys, I get the factors on why the Dust Bowl happened, but seriously, economic depression and all that doesn't really affect the wild. Nature obviously played a part somewhere.
Credits to you, Daniel. Our bad for not explaining that, because it was a little on the geological side of things. But it is indeed very important information on why the Dust Bowl happened.
Whoa. Wait here. Look what I just found on my laptop. I'll describe it to you viewers out there. NASA did a study that shows how the surface temperature of water in the tropical Pacific Ocean was cooler than normal. And that water combined with warmer Atlantic Ocean waters.
Well, I'm not getting into hardcore geology, but let's just say the ocean temperatures were unstable during the 1930s to 1940s. This resulted in dry air and high temperatures in the Dust Bowl areas. The normal weather pattern changed, and the jet stream changed too.
Yep. The jet stream weakened in the 1930s, so the normally moist air from the Gulf of Mexico became drier. So the areas affected by the Dust Bowl did not get as much moist air as before. In fact, Canadian farmers may have even been lucky. Studies of soil moisture actually show the USA had the drier soil.
Well, I guess that gives us more than just the tip of the iceberg. Anyways, I guess what we're all wondering here is, where exactly did the Dust Bowl happen, and where did it affect the most, Dr. Liu?
Well, the Dust Bowl occurred throughout much of the Canadian prairies, and even spread through much of the high-yielding agricultural areas in the USA. However, we should really only focus on where in Canada the Dust Bowl is situated. Since we are focusing on aiding farmers in the prairies with the current weather conditions, pretty cold though. The majority of the droughts occurred throughout a large area that consists of the prairies, but the worst was in a smaller area called Palliser's Triangle. Palliser's Triangle. It was a triangular area of land situated in the southern parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Palliser's Triangle was quite arid though, and it was first seen as unsuitable for farming crops. However, in the 1920s, farming technology developed, and it became more advanced. It allowed farmers to extend into unsuitable areas in the past. The poor agricultural practices, as mentioned before, in dry conditions, turned the area into what we know now as the Dust Bowl.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, I guess things got too good to be true, hey Kevin? Good things never last. I guess the farmers paid dearly for overusing the land. So, what discomforts did the farmers have to go through if they did not go to the city and instead remained on their farms?
Well, in many ways it was humans versus beasts. I guess Kev can explain more about that.
Kevin put it pretty clear, actually, as weird as things sound. Gophers overpopulated the farmlands because of all the loose dirt and sand. Grasshoppers bred in the trillions and ravaged the fields. Those people that drove around back then had grasshoppers slamming onto their windshields. There were plagues of locusts swarming around everywhere. So yes, in many ways it was human versus beast. Farmers had to plant their seeds, and during those times, the dust storms pretty much made it impossible. They planted the seeds, and the dust storms lifted everything back up. It was just chaos for the farmers. The dust, it was in the farmers' clothes, over their body, in their eyes. It was everywhere, Daniel. Everywhere.
Wow. I just could not imagine how I would cope with such conditions, seeing as how well the average person has it today.
Yeah.
However, for those who decided that they could deal with the Dust Bowl, how did the government aid them throughout those struggling years?
Okay, well, let's face it. Even without those nuisances and troubles, wheat production was still despairingly low. It wasn't enticing at all for the farmers to stay, eh? And the government realized they would have to intervene if they wished for a supply of wheat to feed their country to stay constant. So you got the Prime Minister, Richard Bedford Bennett. He offered $5 a month for any family that continued to stay and work on their farms. It was a good idea, but still didn't offer much help in terms of reaping rewards. No one was getting rich. It is clearly shown within reports of just how many farmers left their farmsteads throughout the duration of the Dust Bowl. 33,000 families, 33,000, I repeat, abandoned their farms, and a total of 250,000 farmers left for the city between 1931 and 1941.
Wow.
With the growing decline of readily available farmers, the government took action. They deemed any unemployed urban family on relief or agricultural experience who was willing to settle on an abandoned farmstead eligible for a $200 grant at $400 in loans.
That's very interesting. The government seemed to have been really generous by willing to pay $200 in grants for those who stayed. But was it enough to keep the farmers going for an entire year? After all, the price of wheat fluctuated throughout the years. But how so?
You're absolutely correct, Daniel. The price of wheat varied greatly throughout the Dust Bowl. By 1919, the cost of a bushel of wheat could be seen sold for $2.19, which was the best price I'd seen in a long time. The prices improved then because the farmers had a readily available market, which was the government. Then you got the 1920s, which steadily wore on. The price continued to decline until they were as low as $1.05 in 1929. It could have been a problem even then, if not for the fact that agricultural machinery had allowed for greater crop yields each year. It wasn't seen as much of a worry to many farmers at the time, but by 1933 prices had plummeted to under 40 cents a bushel. Sounds like a good price for buyers today, but it was economically disastrous. And the main causes were how the international price of wheat declined because of high import tariffs. The economy was doing very poorly overall, and simply a lack of demand.
Yep.
Throughout the 30s, the prices remained depressingly low, and who would have thought it would take a world war to bring the price of wheat back up again?
Well, Kevin, I would also like to point out the fact that Australian, Russian, and Argentinian farmers were having huge harvests of wheat at the time.
Good point.
Wow, that sounds really demoralizing for the farmers who decided to continue to farm through the Dust Bowl. But what I want to know is, how did the lifestyle of the farmers change throughout the Dust Bowl? I mean, surely their lives would have to be adapted to the Dust Bowl conditions.
That's a good observation, host. The farmers who stayed on their farms changed their lives dramatically. The first thing that the farmers had to adapt to was the fact that they had no water. It was a drought, for God's sakes. The farmers would have to walk for miles on end to obtain some water to haul back to the farm. Also, because the farmers were only able to haul back so much water, they had to use it multiple times before they would use it to water the crops. It was awful! Simply awful. We're so lucky the farmers of this generation in Canada did not have to do that.
For sure we are.
Indeed. My grandfather, who was a journalist back then in the Dust Bowl days, told me a story about how the farmers had to cope with the lack of water. He told me that one time when he went over to the prairies to do a news report, he visited a farmer's house. The farmer was hardworking and, of course, loved to farm a lot. However, when my grandfather visited his house, he was almost like a foreigner. He didn't know what he did to survive. So my grandfather, who was oblivious to the conditions in which they had to live in, wasted their water by pouring it all out after he washed his hands. The farmer was furious. He told my father that the water had to be used at least 2 other times before they could water the crops. They would use the water to wash their hands, and use it again to clean their clothes, use the water to drink, and then finally they would use it to water the crops.
Wow. It's actually amazing that we have real tales of people from back then. But there is one thing that I don't understand. Why would farmers even want to stay on their farms in the first place?
You know, that is a good question. I mean, why suffer? thing is that many farmers had lived on the farm their entire life. The farm was passed down from generation to generation. It'd be hard to change lifestyle so quickly from a rural country farmer to city folk. Also, guys, farming was the only thing they would know most of the time. Farmers didn't get an education or go to school. They would stay on the farm and perform the physical labor that they were taught to do since they were young. If a farmer moved to the city and applied for a job, chances were somebody with more experience would apply as well. So farmers were in just as much debt in the city as they would have been on the farm, except they were in a new environment. However, some farmers did leave. 33,000 farms abandoned in search of new jobs. Farmers would even burn their own crops, because it cost more to harvest them than they would make selling it. These low prices were only one reason farmers left, though. We mentioned before, the infestations of grasshoppers and gophers were outrageous, and if you were squeamish, you would not want to live in the prairies. So those are only some reasons why they did leave their farms in search of new city life. But with unemployment rates up to 25%, things look dim.
I guess if farmers left for the city's unemployment ranks, it wouldn't help much at all. Anyways, we have the Black Tuesday, but there is also the Black Sunday apparently. It was a devastating day where a massive dust storm surged through the countryside and damaged over 5 million acres. Dust storms were more than a hindrance. They were destructive. Oh, we just received some interesting trivia. The Dust Bowl actually got its name from Robert Gagar, who was covering the storms and referred to it as the Dust Bowl. Quite interesting. Anyways, what long-term consequences arose from these harsh years in the Dust Bowl?
Well, the Dust Bowl lasted many years and took quite a toll on farmers, Canada's economy, and even the world. However, there were also some benefits that arose from the confines of the brutal conditions. First of all, many farmers looked back on what had caused the tragic Dust Bowl in the first place, so that they would be able to apply these to future practices. A major lesson they learned was how to balance farming expansion and agricultural practices. Farmers had to adjust and apply those lessons immediately if they wished to revitalize their farmlands. They had to not over-farm the lands as they did in the 1920s and simply notice the abundance of hints towards the beginning of an economical crash. However, the only beneficial consequences were mental, and the land was still ravaged. Thus, it took up to until the 50s for the land to be completely renewed and nourished, and even then the land wasn't perfect, but far better than it had been during the Great Depression.
So, I guess for the farmers now, I know times are tough, but don't worry. The bad times passed then, I'm sure it will now too. We citizens, at least certainly us, and definitely more, will have your back.
Thank you for that, Dr. Wang and Dr. Liu. But we are almost out of time. I would just like to thank you two for joining us this morning and presenting your knowledge on the topic.
No problem, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Also, I would like to thank our viewers for listening into our premiere, which I hope you enjoyed. Next week's guest will be here, same time, presenting on more of Canada's history. Thanks again, and have a good day.
The National, from the Canadian Broadcasting Centre.